You really think a place like this is for people like you?" The voice came from directly behind Celeste Odom, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had spent decades learning exactly how much damage it could do without ever raising itself above a conversational tone. She didn't turn around immediately. She had learned, through 41 years of living in a body the world had decided to have opinions about, that turning around too fast gave people like him exactly what they wanted. The flinch, the startled eyes, the visible proof that they had rattled something loose inside you. She finished setting her leather portfolio on the glass check-in counter, smoothed the front of her blazer with one unhurried hand and, then, only then, turned to face him. Security Supervisor Dale Morrow was a man who wore his uniform the way some men wore cologne. Too much in all the wrong places, clearly compensating for something he couldn't name out loud. He was pushing 55, thick through the middle, with a jaw that sat permanently clenched and pale blue eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had never once in his life been told that he was wrong about anything important. His name badge was polished to a shine that his actual character could never match. He had one thumb hooked into his belt, fingers resting casually near his radio, a posture designed to communicate absolute territorial ownership of the lobby of the Hargrove Medical Center. "I have a surgical consultation scheduled at 9, Celeste said. Her voice was the same temperature as the marble floor beneath her feet. 6th floor, cardiothoracic. Morrow's expression didn't shift. That was the particular brand of contempt that required no visible effort. The kind installed so deep it had become structural. Consultations check in at the side entrance. This lobby is for whom, exactly? The question sat between them like something she had placed on a table with great deliberateness. Not thrown, placed. Morrow's jaw worked once. For physicians and credentialed administrative staff. "Then we agree," Celeste said, and turned back to the check-in desk, where a young woman in scrubs was watching the exchange with her pen frozen above her clipboard, expression unreadable in the careful way that meant she understood exactly what she was witnessing. "I'm Dr. Celeste Odom, board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. I have a 9 o'clock. The receptionist, her badge read Trina, blinked, found her professional footing, and began typing with quiet efficiency. Morrow stepped forward. "Not far, just enough. I'm going to need to see your credentials before you proceed past this desk." Celeste looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at an EKG strip when something didn't match the clinical picture, with complete attention, complete calm, and the quiet certainty of someone who already knew what they were seeing. "Do you ask every person who walks through that door for credentials? It's standard procedure when what?" She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. When what, specifically, is the trigger for this particular standard procedure? The lobby was not empty. It was 8:53 in the morning, which meant the Tuesday rush had already deposited a steady population of staff, patients, and family members across the pale terrazzo floors. A physical therapist with a rolling equipment bag had paused near the elevator bank. An older man in a visitor lanyard had stopped pretending to look at his phone. A medical student in a white coat that was still too new and bright was frozen near the coffee kiosk, watching with the expression of someone filing away a lesson they hadn't signed up to receive. Morrow lowered his voice, which somehow made it worse. "Ma'am, I've been working security at this hospital for 19 years. I know who belongs here." "Then you know Dr. Odom," Trina said from behind the desk. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. She didn't look up from her screen. "She's been on staff here for 7 years. She performed my mother's valve repair." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Morrow's face did something complicated. He was a man whose authority had always been rubber-stamped by the people around him, and now he was in a room where that rubber stamp was nowhere to be found, and his particular brand of manufactured confidence had no protocol for that situation. He defaulted to the only mechanism he had left. Escalation dressed up as procedure. "I still need to verify." "Verify what?" The voice came from the elevator bank, and it did not belong to anyone who had previously been part of this conversation. Dr. Howard Pratt, chief of surgery at Hargrove Medical Center, was a 62-year-old white man with the compact, unhurried energy of someone who had spent 4 decades being the most qualified person in every room he entered and had long since stopped needing to announce it. He was carrying a paper coffee cup and a manila folder, and he had clearly just stepped off the elevator with no intention of being relevant to anything happening in this lobby. But he had stopped. He had listened for approximately 20 seconds, and now he was walking across the terrazzo with the specific purposefulness of a man who had decided something. Howard. Celeste's tone shifted. Not warmer exactly, but different. The shorthand of colleagues who had shared difficult hours. Celeste. Pratt looked at Morrow. Is there a problem? I was just conducting a routine. Dale, Pratt said. The single syllable carried 19 of institutional origin in it, most of it unflattering to the person it was addressed to. I've heard about 3 complaints about you in the past 2 months from staff members who look like Dr. Odom. I've been patient because the administration has been patient, but I want to be very clear with you right now. In this lobby, in front of these witnesses, he paused. He was not a dramatic man, which made the pause more effective than drama would have been. Dr. Odom is the reason 6 people in this building are alive today who would not otherwise be. She is one of the finest surgeons on this coast, and if you are unable to extend to her the basic professional courtesy you extend to every white physician who walks through that door, then I have a very serious problem with you being in this building. Morrow opened his mouth. I'm not finished, with the quiet authority of someone who genuinely never needed to raise their voice because they had never needed to. I'm going to recommend to administration that a formal review be opened on your conduct, today, and I'm going to make clear that this incident, along with the previous complaints, will be part of that documentation. He looked at Trina. Can you make sure Dr. Odom is checked in and has everything she needs for her 9 o'clock? Already done, Dr. Pratt, Trina said. Celeste picked up her portfolio. She looked at Morrow one final time. Not with triumph, not with the vindication she had earned the right to express, but with something quieter and harder to categorize. It was the look of a woman who had been here before, and before that, and before that, and who had decided long ago that none of it was going to pull her under. Excuse me, she said. I have a patient. She walked past him. Her heels were steady on the terrazzo. She did not look back. What Dale Morrow didn't know, what most people in that lobby didn't know, was that Celeste Odom had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, the 3rd of 5 children, in a house where the heat went out twice one winter, and her mother worked a double shift at a linen service 4 days a week without complaint, because complaint was a luxury the Odom household could not afford. What they did have was books. Her father, a man who had wanted to be a physician and had become instead a high school biology teacher, who was one of the finest educators his district had ever produced, kept a specific shelf in the living room that he called the argument shelf. Every book on it, he told his children, was a tool. Somebody will try to make you small, he said, many times in many different configurations of the same essential sentence. The only answer is to become so undeniably excellent that the attempt becomes embarrassing. For them, Celeste had taken this more literally than he probably intended. She had graduated top of her class at Spelman. She had completed her residency at Johns Hopkins, a place where she had been the only black woman in her cohort for 3 of her 4 years, a fact she noted carefully, and chose not to let define her in either direction. She had completed a cardiothoracic fellowship at UCSF and been recruited to Hargrove 7 years ago by Pratt himself, who had seen her present a paper on minimally invasive mitral valve reconstruction at a conference in Chicago, and described her afterward to his department as, frankly, the most technically gifted surgeon I've watched operate in 15 years. She was not famous in the way that certain surgeons become famous, the ones who wrote books and appeared on morning television and had their names on hospital wings. She was famous in the way that mattered more, among the people who knew what they were looking at, among the families who had received phone calls after procedures that changed everything, among the residents and fellows who had stood across from her in the OR and understood, sometimes for the first time, what the absolute upper threshold of human precision looked like. She was 41 years old. She had never once been asked for her credentials by security when she came through the main entrance of Hargrove Medical Center. Not in 7 years. Not until Dale Morrow had transferred to the main building from the parking structure 4 months ago. He had made a calculation, the kind so automatic he probably couldn't articulate it if asked. He had looked at a black woman in a blazer and a natural with silver at her temples and made an assessment so fast it bypassed the conscious parts of his brain entirely. And the assessment was, not one of us, not someone who belongs in the expensive spaces, not a physician. It was not the first time someone had made that calculation about Celeste Odom. It would probably not be the last. But today, in this particular lobby, with these particular witnesses, it was going to cost him. The 9 o'clock consultation was with a 57-year-old man named Roy Ashby, a former long-haul trucker from Macon, who had been experiencing progressive shortness of breath for 8 months and had been told by 2 previous physicians that it was probably anxiety. It was not anxiety. It was severe aortic stenosis with a valve area that had narrowed to a number that made Celeste's expression go very still when she reviewed the imaging the night before. He was sitting in the examination room when she came in, a large, quiet man with calloused hands and the particular posture of someone who had learned to expect bad news slowly. "Mr. Ashby," she said, pulling up a stool and sitting down at eye level, which was something she always did. "I've looked at everything they sent over. I want to talk through what I'm seeing with you." He nodded. His wife, a small woman named Deborah, who had driven him from Macon in the pre-dawn dark, was in the chair beside him with a notepad open on her knee. Celeste talked them through it with the specific combination of directness and decency that was, in its own way, a skill she had spent as long developing as her surgical technique. She explained what was happening. She explained what the options were. She explained what she recommended and why. She answered every question Deborah had, and Deborah had many, which Celeste appreciated the way she always appreciated people who arrived prepared. When they left, Roy moving slowly, Deborah's hand on his arm, both of them looking simultaneously shaken and, strangely, relieved in the way that people sometimes look when they finally have a true picture of something they'd only half understood. Celeste sat alone in the examination room for 2 minutes. She did this often, between patients. She let the particular weight of each situation settle before moving to the next one. She found it kept her honest. She was thinking about Roy Ashby's valve. She was thinking about the approach she'd use, the specific instruments she'd want, the way she'd need to coordinate with the anesthesia team given his secondary pulmonary issues. She was thinking about the incision. She was not thinking about Dale Morrow. She had learned, at considerable cost over many years, that the people who tried to diminish her were at their most powerful when she gave them real estate in her head. They were not worth the square footage. What she didn't know, as she moved through her Tuesday. 3 more consultations, 2 hours of OR time on a follow-up case, a teaching round with 4 third-year residents who needed to understand why you never made assumptions about a patient's pain tolerance based on how they presented in the waiting room. Was that the lobby of Hargrove Medical Center had become quietly active in her absence. Trina, the check-in receptionist, had mentioned the incident to a colleague during her break. That colleague had mentioned it to a nurse she was friends with on the cardiac floor. The nurse had mentioned it to a physician's assistant, who had had her own incident with Morrow 8 weeks prior, and had filed a complaint that had, as complaints involving security supervisors often did, moved through the system at the speed of institutional reluctance. The medical student at the coffee kiosk, a 24-year-old named Owen Briley, in his 2nd year, doing a cardiothoracic rotation that he had requested specifically because he had read one of Celeste's published papers on valve reconstruction, had gone back to his shared office and written a precise, detailed account of what he had witnessed, including timestamps, and sent it to the hospital's patient and staff advocacy email address, and then, after a moment's deliberation, to the office of the hospital's chief diversity and inclusion officer with a subject line that read, "Witnessed, Hargrove Main Lobby, 8:53 a.m., Tuesday." The physical therapist with the rolling bag had, when she reached her department on the 3rd floor, told her supervisor that she thought someone should know what she had just seen in the lobby. Her supervisor, who had been at Hargrove for 22 years, and was done being surprised by Dale Morrow, picked up her desk phone. Howard Pratt, for his part, had gone directly from the lobby to his office, set down his coffee, and pulled up Morrow's employee file on his computer. He read it with the specific attention of someone who was no longer looking for reasons to extend benefit of the doubt. By noon, the formal review process had been initiated. By 2 o'clock, Morrow had been called to the Director of Operations office, where he sat across from 3 people with folders and a recorder running, and discovered that 19 years of institutional protection had a much shorter shelf life than he had assumed. He did not take it quietly. He insisted that he had been performing his duties. He insisted that Dr. Odom had been aggressive. He used the word hostile 3 times in 12 minutes, each time referring to a woman who had, by every account of every person present in that lobby, never raised her voice or made a single threatening gesture. His insistence had the specific, hollow sound of a story that required too much scaffolding to stand on its own. The director of operations, a woman named Patricia Ewan, who had spent 18 years managing medical institutions and had a particular talent for recognizing when she was hearing something she needed to stop enabling immediately, let him finish. Then she opened the folder in front of her to a printed page that showed the lobby's security camera footage timeline. "Mr. Morrow," she said, "I've reviewed the footage from this morning. I've also reviewed the footage from 3 incidents referenced in the prior complaints, and I've spoken with 6 staff members who witnessed today's interaction." She closed the folder. "Your employment with Hargrove Medical Center is terminated, effective today. You'll be escorted to retrieve your personal items from the security office. Your access badge has already been deactivated." Morrow stared at her. Something moved across his face, the specific passage of a man watching the architecture of a belief system he'd built his life on develop a crack that was going to go all the way through. 19 years, he said. His voice had changed. The casual authority was gone. What was underneath it was not particularly interesting. "Yes," Patricia Ewan said, "I'm aware." Celeste learned about it at 4:15 when Pratt knocked on her office door between her last consultation and a case review meeting and told her what had happened, efficiently and without editorializing, which she appreciated. She sat with it for a moment. "The complaints from before," she said, "the 2 other staff members, one of them is being contacted today. The other already knows." Pratt sat down in the chair across from her desk, which he rarely did. "I want to say something, and I want you to know I mean it in the way I'm saying it and not any other way." "All right. I should have moved faster on the previous complaints. I knew about them. I told myself the process was moving. It wasn't moving fast enough." He looked at her steadily. "That's on me, and I wanted to say it directly." Sir Celeste looked at her desk. She thought about the 2 other staff members who filed complaints and waited. She thought about all the complaints that had never been filed because the people who had them had made the calculation, the thoroughly rational, experience-based calculation, that the cost of filing would exceed the benefit of any result. "Thank you for saying that," she said, and she meant it, specifically, and without the freight of everything she could have said around it. After Pratt left, she sat alone in her office for a few minutes. On her desk were 3 patient folders, a journal she'd been meaning to annotate for 2 weeks, a mug of coffee that had gone cold, and a framed photograph her youngest nephew had drawn for her when he was 7. Figure in a white coat with a stethoscope, the size of a hula hoop, captioned in his looping child's handwriting, "My aunt the doctor." She looked at the photograph for a moment. She looked at it the way she looked at things she needed to remember were real. Then she picked up Roy Ashby's file, opened it, and got back to work. 6 months later, Dale Morrow sat in an administrative hearing, convened after a formal complaint was submitted jointly by 3 former Hargrove staff members, including the physician's assistant who had filed the original report 8 weeks before Celeste's incident, under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. The hearing was held in a room that was nothing like the marble lobby where he had decided, on a Tuesday morning in front of a dozen witnesses and a running security camera, that he knew who belonged somewhere and who didn't. His union representative sat beside him. 2 attorneys sat across from him. On the table was a printed transcript of his own words, captured by Hargrove's audio-enabled security system, timestamped to the second. "For people like you," one of the attorneys read aloud without inflection. "That is the phrase you used. Is that correct?" Morrow looked at the table. He said yes. The word came out smaller than he probably intended. The outcome of the hearing took 3 weeks to arrive by certified letter. He lost his security license. He was found liable for documented workplace harassment under federal civil rights statute. The financial penalty was significant. The professional consequences were permanent. The license that had been his livelihood, his identity, the physical object onto which he had projected 19 years of manufactured authority, was revoked. He was 55 years old and would not work in security again. On the morning the letter arrived, though Celeste Odom didn't know it had arrived, because she had stopped following the administrative timeline once she understood the institutional process was finally, actually moving. She was in operating room 4 at Hargrove Medical Center, standing across a draped patient from her chief resident, a young woman named Dr. Adeze Mbeki, who had the hands of a natural and the focus of someone who understood what it meant to be trusted with something irreplaceable. The patient on the table was Roy Ashby. The music playing softly from the Bluetooth speaker on the anesthesia cart was Coltrane. It always was, in Celeste's OR. She had established this preference 7 years ago and had never revisited it. "Walk me through the next step," Celeste said. Not because she needed Dr. Mbeki to tell her, because she needed Dr. Mbeki to know that she could. The resident walked her through it. Her voice was steady. Her hands, when she began to move, were steady too. Celeste watched. She corrected one small thing. She confirmed 2 others. She stepped in when she needed to, and stepped back when she didn't, which was the entire skill. The one that took years to learn and that no one ever really talked about in the literature. Knowing the difference between the moments that required you and the moments that required you to trust someone else to become what you'd helped them become. The valve repair took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Roy Ashby's heart, when the bypass was discontinued and the new rhythm established itself on the monitor, beat with a clarity and regularity that it had not achieved in more than a year. The room was quiet for a moment in the specific way that operating rooms go quiet after something has gone exactly right. "Good work," Celeste said, to the resident, to the team, to the room. She meant all of it. She always did. Outside the hospital, in the city, in the particular ordinary texture of a late Tuesday morning, everything continued. Traffic, coffee, the small frictions and small mercies of a world that was indifferent in the aggregate and capable of tremendous specific cruelty and tremendous specific kindness, often in the same building, on the same morning, depending entirely on who happened to be watching. Inside operating room 4, Roy Ashby's repaired heart kept beating, regular, strong, entirely unbothered by what anyone had ever assumed it was capable of. If you've ever watched someone be told they don't belong in a room they built with their own hands, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories about quiet people doing extraordinary things, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you next time.